Because behavioral assessment is a subjective process, assessors are required to make judgments about the assessee's work behavior. This means that the assessment process relies on consistent behavioral observation, accurate recall of observed behavioral incidents, and reliable summation and interpretation of these incidents. Each of these requirements is subject to the possibility of error. Assessment error may be either unintentional or intentional. Unintentional errors arise from the limitations of human cognitive capacity, and especially from the fallibility of unaided memory, and this frequently happens because the information processing demands exceed the limits of cognitive capacity. By contrast, intentional errors arise from the conscious manipulation of assessment scores for the assessor's own personal or political reasons. Reliable assessment and classification may actually be the last consideration on the assessor's mind. They may be pursuing their own goals rather than those of the organization. Rather, bias occurs when performance ratings are influenced by factors other than actual performance. Bias can distort decisions about pay, promotion, development, and even termination. Importantly, bias is not always intentional. When we talk about rater bias, most leaders or raters don't mean to be unfair. These are unintentional errors. Unintentional rater bias is driven by human judgment. The halo effect occurs when one negative trait influences the entire rating, while Horn's effect arises when one positive trait overshadows the entire rating. The assessor falls back on trait-like judgments of the person rather than the performance. First impression error occurs when the assessor develops an enduring negative or positive impression of the assessor at an initial encounter and allows that impression to color the assessment of all subsequent performance, which is similar to the halo and Horn's errors. Recency bias gives too much weight to recent events. Without a written record of employee behavior, the assessor may simply rate on the basis of the most recent and clearly recorded behavior. Similarity error arises where the assessor habitually but unknowingly gives more favorable assessments to individuals whom they see as being like themselves in appearance, interest, behavior, and/or perceived personality, and lower assessments to perceived opposites. Similarity error may be a deeply embedded cause of unconscious discrimination on gender, ethnic, racial, and age-related grounds in some organizations. Attribution error occurs when the assessor makes unreliable judgments regarding the causes of observed high or low work performance. One of the major problems of traditional supervisory assessment is that supervisors are far more likely to attribute the performance by their subordinates to within-person factors rather than to contextual factors, such as the level of resourcing or the quality of supervision itself. What supervisor would willingly admit that the quality of their supervision may be substandard? Attribution error is also especially salient where self-assessment is involved. Exponents of attribution theory argue that self-assessment judgments have a high propensity for self-serving attribution or bias. Intentional bias occurs when raters consciously distort ratings. This may happen to avoid conflict, protect relationships, reward loyalty, obtain resources, or meet organizational constraints. These distortions undermine trust and system credibility, whether supervisors, peers, subordinates, or the self-assessment as a tool for furthering their perceived personal interests or interpersonal politics within the organization. Leniency bias reflects a manager's kindness rating to avoid interpersonal conflict or to attract more resources to their unit. The supervisors may give some or all assessees an undeservedly high rating. To illustrate, if a supervisory assessor wishes to impress her own bosses, supervisors may give high rating to their own subordinates because they perceive that truthful assessments may reflect badly on their managerial performance. Alternatively, although less commonly, the assessor may be unduly harsh with some or all assessees, perhaps to assert power over them or to drive them to enhance their real performance level further still. Harshness or severity error is a hallmark of the 90 management by fear approach to staff supervision. Central tendency occurs when raters avoid differentiation by rating most people at the midpoint of the assessment range to avoid conflict or to maintain workplace harmony. This can be harmful to the organization as it will demotivate the high performers. Intentional errors are potentially both more destructive and more difficult to eliminate than unintended errors. There are inevitable consequences of organizational power inequality and interpersonal politics. The primary means of controlling intentional error is to maximize assessor accountability for the judgments they make, as well as their belief in the validity and value of assessment outcomes.